The Lord be with you. A reading from the Holy Gospel according to Mark. Jesus took with him Peter and James and John, and led them up a high mountain, apart by themselves. And he was transfigured before them, and his clothes became dazzling white, such as no one on earth could bleach them. There appeared to them Elijah and Moses, who were talking with Jesus. Then Peter said to Jesus, "Rabbi, it is good for us to be here. Let us make 3 dwellings, one for you, one for Moses, and one for Elijah." Peter did not know what to say, for they were terrified. Then a cloud overshadowed them, and from the cloud there came a voice, "This is my beloved Son. Listen to him." Suddenly, when they looked around, they saw no one with them any more, but only Jesus. As they were coming down the mountain, he ordered them to tell no one about what they had seen, until after the Son of Man had risen from the dead. So they kept the matter to themselves, questioning what this rising from the dead could mean. The Gospel of the Lord. Sacrifice. What is a sacrifice? It's when you give something up, right? And if you ask the average person on the street to explain what Lent is, if they've heard of it, chances are they'll say something like, "Yeah, Lent's it's that time when people give something up, right? Like chocolate. Hey, is that why the Easter Bunny is made out of chocolate?" Now don't get me wrong, I am not belittling the giving up of or sacrificing of chocolate or sweets for Lent. If done in the right spirit, it's actually quite beautiful that something so simple can become for us a path to real spiritual maturity and trust in God. Because that is the point of sacrificing, of giving up things for Lent, to grow in spiritual maturity and trust in God. Yes, you might eat a bit healthier and lose a few pounds. Yes, you might grow in virtue and self-discipline. But if a healthier lifestyle and an exercise in willpower is all that happens between now and Holy Thursday, I'm afraid we will have missed the point of whatever Lenten sacrifices we've taken on. And the point of sacrifice is placed before us today in a rather dramatic way in our first reading. That famous or infamous account of the binding of Isaac. As we heard, God tested Abraham. He said to him, "Abraham." And Abraham said, "Here I am." And God said, "Take your son, your only son Isaac, whom you love, and go to the land of Moriah, and offer him there as a burnt offering on one of the mountains that I shall show you." All of a sudden, giving up chocolate for Lent doesn't seem so bad after all. But we need to understand what God was actually asking of Abraham, because if not, we can get all sorts of weird ideas about God. So let's look at that. God tested Abraham. Why does God test Abraham? It seems unfair, doesn't it? Can't God just give the guy a break? I mean, he's an old man. He's been trying to follow God all these years. Just leave him alone. Is God so fickle and insecure that God needs to test us to know whether we will follow him or not? If that's how we think or feel, and we should be honest with God about how we think or feel, because we certainly won't fool God, we'll only be fooling ourselves. If that's how we think or feel, this is an invitation to consider our image of God. What do we think God is like? Do we think of God as a vague and out there somewhere far away in heaven, God doing God's thing and us down here doing our own thing? And as long as we keep God's commandments and stay in line more or less, God will bless us and leave us alone. If that's how we see God, then yes, what God asks of Abraham would be unfair. It would be like a total stranger asking you to give them one of, or perhaps the most precious thing in your life. But this is not the image of God that the Scriptures present to us. And this is what makes Abraham great. Not because Abraham did everything right. He didn't. But because Abraham believed God. Abraham followed God's call and came to know what God is really like. Abraham certainly didn't come to this point all at once. He came to know what God is really like, that God can be trusted. He came to know this by following God, one step at a time. And this is what it means to say, God tested Abraham. When God tests us, it's not so that God can know something about us. God already knows. It's so that we can know something about ourselves and about God. We come to discover, like Abraham, that God can be trusted. And we can also discover the joy of finding out that we are people who will follow God. Because Abraham didn't have to go. He could have stayed with what was comfortable, with what he knew, with what was familiar. But Abraham believed God. Abraham came to know God could be trusted and became someone who followed God. And this is the meaning and purpose of sacrifice. God doesn't need us to make sacrifices. We are the ones who need us to make sacrifices. Because it's through them that we learn, as I hope many of you have already learned in your journey of faith, that God can be trusted. Sometimes the choice will be dramatic. It may be letting go of our dreams or plans, or letting go of something we've built up for ourselves over the years. And sometimes the choice will be much less dramatic, something as simple as giving up chocolate or sweets for Lent. But the point of it remains the same. Making a sacrifice is a call from God to step out of what is settled and familiar and to walk before Him, and to discover that God can be trusted, and that we are people who will follow God and obey His voice.